An apocalyptic soundtrack, but actually an impressive feat of construction. According to the People's Daily, this is the fourth day of the building of a 1,000-bed hospital in Wuhan, due to be completed by Sunday. This is the epicenter of this novel coronavirus. The numbers needing medical help in Hubei province are growing. More than 2,700 people have been diagnosed, 461 of them are severely ill, and 81 have died. The Chinese government is under pressure, dispatching the premier and vice premier to the Hubei region to assess the situation. Premier Li Keqiang promising to ship in more protection gear and medical teams, and guaranteeing food supplies, while later urging construction workers to hurry up with the hospital. The rate of infection and spread is still uncertain. A flu epidemic can kill tens or even hundreds of thousands. In other coronavirus outbreaks like SARS in the early 2000s, 800 died. But this is early days. Some experts at Imperial College London estimate that at the upper end, as many as 100,000 people could already be infected. However, while sicker people appear more vulnerable to the virus, this is not across the board.
Well, the most recent reports, there was a paper in The Lancet just came out, shows that actually it is quite a wide age range, and not everyone who is ending up in hospital has risk factors. It does appear that people with diabetes or high blood pressure are at greater risk, but that doesn't mean to say that other people are spared.
The suspicion is the coronavirus started here in the Wuhan seafood market, possibly from wild animals sold there.
They've looked at the market itself to see if there was virus in the market itself, like contamination. And some of the samples from the environmental sampling came back positive for novel coronavirus. We understand that they are also testing animals. We haven't heard of any positive animals that have come back.
The virus has spread, but not in huge numbers, to other countries. But many governments are taking their citizens out of Wuhan. The UK Foreign Office, though, has been accused of being slow. Lockdown of Wuhan and surrounding cities continues, people only venturing out when they have to. And medical staff are said to be exhausted as the crisis shows no signs of abating. One report from China said that the infection has been passed on by people not knowing they're ill, making it harder to detect and easier to spread. The main symptoms, however, are fever, dry cough and shortness of breath. This is the first case of human-to-human transmission of the virus in Europe. Other cases where the patient has not been in China have been reported in Japan, Taiwan and possibly Vietnam. A growing number of countries are now taking their citizens out of Wuhan and the Hubei province, much of which is in lockdown. The UK government has asked any Britons who want to leave to contact the consulate.
As we reported earlier, the coronavirus outbreak in China continues. Of great concern now is that the virus may be spreading even faster than previously thought. William Brangham has the latest.
Judy, while at least 14 other nations are monitoring people who've arrived from affected areas in China, the epicenter for this outbreak remains the city of Wuhan. Wuhan is bigger than any American city, and its 11 million residents are living in semi-lockdown. Nearly all modes of transportation in and out of the city are closed off. Chris Buckley is a China-based correspondent for the New York Times. He's in Wuhan, and he joins us now. Chris Buckley, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us. Can you give us a sense of what it is like in Wuhan today?
Well, today on the streets of Wuhan, the mood was extremely subdued. Now, ever since last week, the city has been on a lockdown with these vast restrictions on travel, people not being allowed to leave the city. Fewer people are on the streets. So what you see when you walk out is a very empty cityscape. People tend to stay in their homes. They come out very rarely to buy food, for occasional exercise, but most of the time people are staying at home. And the only other reason people are going out is if they have a fever or a cold and feel they should be visiting a hospital just in case it's the virus.
I know it's difficult to visit the hospitals in Wuhan. For those that you've seen, can you give us a sense of what it's like there?
I should emphasize that it's very difficult for us to get around, especially with these traffic restrictions. So it's very difficult to visit all of the hospitals. We only have a partial view, but what I have seen is crowded fever clinics which have been taking in dozens and hundreds of people, residents who are worried that the fever they have might be a symptom of this coronavirus. I believe over the past few days it's eased a little, partly because of the traffic restrictions, perhaps partly because of better management of the hospitals as well and more available resources. Things have eased off a bit, but there's still a great need for medical attention in the city.
As the coronavirus continues to spread across China, other nations around the world are starting to increase their precautions. Just a short while ago, British Airways said it was suspending all flights to and from mainland China. That comes after the British government advised against all but essential travel to China. And Indonesia's Lion Air has also just said it's suspending its flights. Other airlines, including United Airlines, Air Canada and Cathay Pacific Airways, have cancelled some flights to China, although in some cases it is because of a lack of demand. Here's travel journalist Simon Calder.
Flights went out normally to Beijing to Shanghai yesterday. They are now on their way back. The flight from Beijing due in at 3 o'clock at Heathrow this afternoon. The flight from Shanghai slightly behind it. They're both over Siberia at the moment. They will have all the normal passengers who were booked on those flights, but they will also have, crucially, the crew who flew out yesterday. And everybody else who was booked on flights from tomorrow onwards from Beijing and Shanghai will now be trying to find alternative routes.
Well, the official figures from China show how the virus is continuing to spread. The number of confirmed fatalities rose by 26 to 132 as of Wednesday morning. Almost all of those deaths are in Hubei province, where the virus was first discovered. And there was also a sharp increase in the number of confirmed infections, up by almost a third to stand at just under 6,000. Well, here's what the Chinese officials had to say at a news conference in Beijing just a short time ago.
We are now in the critical period of the prevention of this epidemic. We need to control the potential source of virus. Yes, recently we do have people travel from Hubei to Fangzhuang area, and in other communities we also have the similar travelers from Wuhan, and also we actually have the registration and management of those people who travel from Wuhan or from the Hubei province, and we ask them to stay at home for the 14 days quarantine.
Let's go live now to Robin Brandt, who's in Shanghai. Robin, welcome to you. With the authorities calling this now at a critical stage, what's your assessment of how they view this crisis as being at?
Well, on the one hand, we have a country that's certainly around Wuhan, the epicenter city, and the surrounding province of Hubei, essentially a lockdown involving millions of people. On the other hand, we have international governments seeking to remove their people from that city. At the same time, airline companies restricting, some of them going even further and completely suspending flights in and out of the country. They say that's because they need to protect their passengers and their staff, but also, as I think you've alluded to, obviously the demand for seats on flights now, given the change in advice in the US, the change in the UK, is going to absolutely plummet. President Xi Jinping yesterday, the man who has said he is in charge of directing personally the response to this, described this outbreak of coronavirus as a devil. They are throwing everything they have at it in terms of logistics, something, of course, by the nature of the authoritarian Communist Party controlled government here, they can do very well. Thousands of military personnel, doctors, a huge amount of money being sent in to try and assist as well. But at the same time, the effort is to try and stop the spread and just contain this virus. And the most effective way of doing that in recent days has essentially been to tell everyone not to return to work, not to return to school. They've postponed the end of China's Lunar New Year festival. That's because the prospect of tens of millions of people crisscrossing the country over the coming days and what that could do for spreading the diseases, frankly, just adds to the nightmare scenario.
OK, Robin Brandt in Shanghai for now. Thank you.
Now, in the last hour, Britain has changed its travel advice, advising against all but essential travel to the whole of mainland China as a result of the new coronavirus. The number of deaths has now jumped to more than 100. British nationals trapped in China have been urged to register with the consulate if they wish to be flown out. with suggestions an airlift may happen quickly and with short notice. Japan and Germany have discovered cases of the virus in people with no history of travel to Wuhan, the city where it first emerged. Our health correspondent Victoria McDonell reports, and a warning, there is flash photography from the start.
They're taking no chances. All Thai Airways flights from China are being thoroughly disinfected. The novel coronavirus has been identified now in 13 countries outside China, with 45 cases confirmed. In Germany, they've reported a patient who had not been in China, but who had come into contact with a Chinese colleague visiting from Shanghai. She'd been infected by her parents, who had come from near Wuhan, at the center of the outbreak.
In the airport also, all the health team officials, they are screening all the patients traveling from China and other countries which is affected now coronavirus. And after that, anybody having symptoms like fever, 101, 102 temperature, and running nose and throat pain and some breathing problem. If these 4 symptoms anybody having, only the persons who are tourists from the China, then only we can call it as suspect cases. That suspect cases, we have around 5 people admitted in fever hospital for the last 4 days.
And screening also has started. If any passenger feeling of running nose or throat infection, they will report to these doctors through the immigration or airlines. They will be tested through thermal scanner, and if anything odd means, they will put in the.
The latest official figures are 106 deaths and more than 4,500 cases confirmed. The army has been called into Wuhan to help, and today the World Health Organization said the increasing numbers were deeply concerning. The staff are overwhelmed. This video from Hubei Daily Media Group shows a doctor breaking down in tears. Hundreds more doctors are being sent to the region, and 2 new hospitals are being built in record-breaking time.
My wife is a medical worker, and I am a builder of the Lei Shenshan Hospital. Our goal right now is to build this hospital better, so that all medical staff like my wife can work worry-free and feel more secure.
And they are desperately needed. Chinese authorities said today that at this time of year, the Wuhan fever clinics would normally see 3,000 patients a day. At their busiest times over the past few days, they have dealt with more than 15,000. Much is still unknown about this new virus. Most patients have been mildly affected, making it harder to detect, but 20% have been severe.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We are continuing to monitor the outbreak of the mysterious new coronavirus tonight. The number of confirmed cases in China keeps soaring nearly a week into the biggest quarantine in history. And another presumptive case has been identified here in Canada. A man in British Columbia who is in his 40s and regularly goes to China to work has isolated himself and is waiting for test results. There are 2 confirmed cases of the coronavirus in Ontario, a husband and wife, both in their 50s, who recently came back from Wuhan, the center of the outbreak. The virus has now spread to Japan and Germany, and in both cases, authorities say the people who are ill did not travel to China themselves, but were in contact with someone who had. The German Ministry of Health now says 4 people were infected after attending a company training event last week with a colleague from Shanghai. As many as 40 people may have come in contact with the woman. In China, there are now about 6,000 confirmed cases, and at least 132 people have died, most of them in Wuhan. The U.S. and the U.K. are sending passenger planes to Wuhan to repatriate their citizens. There are 250 Canadians registered in the region. Foreign Affairs says 126 have contacted the consulate asking for help to get home. But at this point, Canada is not sending a plane to get them.
As if further evidence were needed that these are extraordinary times. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam wearing a face mask, an item she banned last year during the pro-democracy protests. Lam announcing that visitor permits and most travel from the mainland will be limited after Thursday night. Hong Kongers like this man think it's too little, too late. 8 cases have already been reported in Hong Kong. In Beijing, the head of the World Health Organization met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. They agreed for a WHO team to join the 6,000 Chinese medical staff who've been sent to the affected region. The organization says the emergency remains confined to China, but the global risk is high.
So far, it's going back with travelers to foreign countries, whether it's the home country of somebody or a traveler as such. It's not wildly spreading outside of China. But again, we have to be prepared for in case it would.
In Wuhan, state TV shows the much-hyped building of a special new hospital, some prefabricated rooms already in place. Most people living in the city remain holed up at home, many shouting encouragement to each other from apartment windows.
We are not really sure if they are reporting the truth or if they are underreporting the actual numbers or I think it's just not knowing what's actually going on and how long it's gonna last. That's the most scary part.
And cities near the affected Hubei province are increasing checks to anyone arriving. Those with high temperatures sent to hospital immediately. And more than 1,000 kilometers away in Beijing, some empty shelves and long lineups as the first death from the virus is confirmed in the capital. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
A growing list of countries are evacuating their citizens from Wuhan, the centre of China's coronavirus outbreak. Australia says it intends to quarantine its evacuees on Christmas Island, and any Britons returning from the city are to be put in quarantine for 2 weeks. Airlines are taking measures to limit the spread of the disease. This Thai Airways flight is being disinfected after returning from China. Well, British Airways has suspended all flights to China, and United Airlines and Cathay Pacific are restricting routes. The Chinese president says containing the virus remains a grim and complex task, with the number of confirmed cases in China at nearly 6,132 known deaths. Well, some US and Japanese nationals were flown out of Wuhan on Wednesday, and France, South Korea, India and Algeria are among others preparing to bring their citizens home. Australia is under fire for its plan to quarantine 600 evacuees on Christmas Island. That's 2,000 kilometres from the mainland. Shaima Khalil has more from Sydney.